Well, thank you, Dr. Chintan, and for letting me be a part of this very interesting instruction course. And what I'll be talking about is when to and when not to cross-link. And this is actually a very, very difficult topic because if you look at the publications, I think there must be more than 7,500 publications. And we have to, draw our own conclusions as to the relevance of the data which is presented. And for the sake of continuity, I requested Dr. Chintan to that we should present cross-linking in the pediatric cornea in the same go. Now, I read in one of the editorials that cross-linking is the primary aim of collagen cross-linking is to stop the progression of keratoconus, and therefore, if the pathology is stable, the procedure is not indicated. And let's see if it is true by the end of my talk. It took 13 years for the FDA to approve corneal collagen cross-linking from 2003 to 2016. And this is because they said that the data was just not reliable and the studies were not conducted and the kind of sample that was included in the studies. Now, the things that we should know to decide when to cross-link. One is, what will happen to a patient with keratoconus in case you do not cross-link? In other words, the natural history of a patient of keratoconus. What does cross-linking do? What kind of patients are suitable? Which patients are unsuitable? And a knowledge of modifications of the procedure, which may help to make the procedure safer in these circumstances. So all these things are very important to know. And do I really need to cross-link now or can I wait? And the knowledge of the complications of the cross-linking, on which we have one session, and which is the basis of the caution that we are exhibiting in these patients. And some special situations which might warrant aggressive intervention. So, as regards the natural progression of keratoconus, a detailed knowledge of the natural history of keratoconus is fundamental in making informed decisions on when their benefits outweigh the risks of the procedure. And these authors, they retrospectively reconstructed the natural history using control eyes of patients of studies of cross-linking. And they did a very detailed analysis of each and every component of these keratoconic eyes. And they found that at the end of 12 months, which is the inclusion criteria in this study, age less than 17 years and patients with Kmax steeper than 55 diopters, it was recommended are at the highest risk of progression of keratoconus. Another interesting trial was the KeraLink randomized control trial, which is published in Ophthalmology 2021. Now, this studied the effect of collagen cross-linking versus standard care on keratoconus progression in young patients. Difficult study to carry out considering so many people are doing cross-linking. Now, there were 60 participants. We had 30 participants who underwent cross-linking and 30 were observed. The mean age was 10 to 16 years. And there was a mean Kmax value in the groups was 56.5 diopters. The follow-up was 18 months. So they found that at the end of 18 months, the progression was much more in patients who had not received cross-linking to the tune of 53.4 diopters after this thing, the main K2, compared to 49.7 K2 at the end of 18 months. They concluded that keratoconus progression in the study eye is more likely to occur if they've not undergone cross-linking. In their study, 7% of the patients who underwent cross-linking underwent a progression compared to 43% who were randomized to standard care. It's a very compelling evidence to cross-link, especially in younger patients. So what is cross-linking and what does it do? So this was, it's known by the Dresden Protocol because it was first actually established in a meeting which was held in Dresden by Wolinczak and Thusiller. And what happens is that the ectatic cornea is weak and it lacks the bonds between the collagen fibers. And when we put riboflavin dye and we expose it to UVA light of 360 wavelength, what happens is that there's a reaction. There are two types of reactions, anaerobic and aerobic reaction. And the one leads to riboflavin radicals being produced, and the other leads to a singlet oxygen, which is the basis of the cross-linking which occurs. So after cross-links, the cornea becomes stiffer and more resistant to the changes due to the formation of the covalent crosslinks. Possibly, this is the only technique which can stop the progression of corneal ectasia. Now, because of this presence of oxygen, which is critical in the effect of this procedure, it has led to various number of protocols. Now, when we talk about thin corneas, I'm not addressing that because that will be talked about by Dr. Chintan later on. But there's a Dresden protocol, which is the standard protocol: remove the epithelium, put the riboflavin dye, and expose it to UVA light. There's a Creighton protocol: you remove the epithelium by PTK. There's an accelerated cross-linking, which is said to, be faster. There's customized cross-linking, which is supposed to be much more effective. There's pulse cross-linking. They say it improves the oxygen availability during the procedure. There's HPMC versus Dextran. There's Athens protocol. Sufficient to know that all these protocols are actually aimed at improving the efficacy or safety in some way. And these are a person should be aware of these protocols. If you look at the indications, cross-linking has been tried in many indications. However, in this particular talk, my focus is on just keratoconus. So which patients are suitable for cross-linking? Now, it's just not about the keratoconus patient. We have to consider the age of the patient. We have to consider whether the patient is rubbing his eye continuously, if there's any syndromic association or association with other collagen vascular diseases. Family history is important because they're more likely to progress. History of atopy is very important. And of course, in the end, last but not the least, the progression criteria for these patients. Now, Rohit Shetty et al., they have defined some kind of a high risk criteria for progression of keratoconus, including age, eye rubbing, atopic eye disease, frequent changes of glasses, and others, which include pregnancy, Down syndrome, and others. So if your score is more than 8, the patient is a high risk candidate for the progression of keratoconus. Imagine a situation. Now, this map on the left eye of this patient has a 389 Kmax pachymetry at thinnest location, whereas the right eye has 432. If this patient presents, your approach would probably be different if the patient is 10-year-old, 20-year-old, or 40-year-old or more. Why? Because at the age of 40, we might keep this patient under follow-up because he's much less likely to progress. There's a very interesting publication, which is the patient selection for collagen cross-linking. Now, what they have stressed on is a Cochrane review, which was carried out by Sikakis. Now, this review says that, they assessed out of all the trials, they shortlisted only 3 randomized controlled trials which fitted the criteria. So the aim of this was to assess whether there's an evidence that cross-linking is effective and safe treatment for halting progression of keratoconus compared to no treatment. And they concluded that the evidence for the use of cross-linking in the management of keratoconus is limited due to lack of properly conducted RCTs. So we keep talking about progression. So progression, is it simple to label a patient as progressive? Not always. On the right, it's such a jumbled kind of big chart, just one of the charts, different studies, which kind of criteria they have followed. So there are many criteria which are there. The global consensus on keratoconus, which was such a big consensus, and a Delphi panel, even they have said that the criteria, any two: steepening of anterior surface, steepening of posterior surface, and thinning or increase in the rate of corneal thickness change. But they have failed to define it. What should be the criteria? How much of change should we keep? They have not defined in this publication. And this was addressed to some extent by a publication by Bellin et al. So this was published in 2020. So these are recent publications. Now, they did pay attention to this fact. They said parameters over the past years. So in a standardized way, what we count as progression is Kmax increase more than 1 diopters, Kmax minus K minimum increase more than 1 diopters, increase in K mean of more than 0.75 diopters, a pachymetry decrease of more than 2%, a back optic zone radius of the best fitting contact lens 0.1 millimeter or more, and increase in central K of more than 1.5 diopters from baseline, increase in manifest cylinder from more than 1 diopter increase in 24 months, MRSA increase of more than 0.5 diopters, and other values. Even a single point is taken as an indicator. But the important thing is that the posterior elevation is not being considered, and we keep talking about, that how keratoconus is mainly a disease of the posterior corneal surface. We should use the existing technology when available. And the ABCD progression display by Michael Bellin is one of these. It takes into account changes in the anterior surface, posterior surface, thinnest pachymetry, and the visual acuity. The interesting part is it focuses on the 3 millimeter area zone of the thinnest cornea. So that is more likely to have the changes before other parts of the cornea, right? So this is one of the maps, and it gives us the confidence intervals where which patients are likely to progress and which patients are not likely to progress. So these are flagged entries. So if you have more than 2 entries which are in the red flagged area, they would indicate more than 95% of confidence interval that the patient is having progressive keratoconus. So can we predict which patient is going to need cross-linking or not? So this is another interesting study, and they concluded that at an age less than 20 years, an R minimum value, so R minimum value is seen on the pentacam, of the anterior surface predicted the risk of keratoconus progression and requirement of cross-linking. So I'm just feeding you these values so that these are all indicators that the patient is progressing. So ultimately, who to cross-link? One, progressive keratoconus. Second, pediatric keratoconus. And third, people with low corneal thickness. Why low corneal thickness? Because it might be that if they progress, they might not become suitable candidates for performing a standard Dresden protocol. And that is not something we really want to see in a patient of keratoconus. We have to consider other factors. What is the severity of the disease? What is the amount of visual loss in this patient? What is he reading? What is the refractive error? What is the condition of the other eye? So all these things have to be considered when we have to plan the cross-linking in these patients. So if you look at clinical scenarios, one is that the patient comes to you, he's under follow-up, and he has progressed and using so many of these criteria that I have enumerated. And so we take this patient up for cross-linking. There's a simple scenario. If a patient has made the first decision, and decision has to be made, what we are going to do? The first thing I ask the patient is, do you feel that you have worsened in the last 6 months to 1 year? And we also do we check the power of the glasses that the patient is wearing. If the patient is wearing a glass with the 4 spherical and -2 cylinder, and we do a refraction fresh, which comes out at 5 cylinder and 3 diopters of cylinder, I would take it as a progression in this patient. Weed out unsuitable candidates, corneal scarring, active ocular allergy, herpes, pregnancy lactation to a large extent, autoimmune disorders. All these things which affect the healing of the epithelium are also relative contraindications in these patients. Be aware of the possible complications. We have a talk, so I'm not going to address these, but we should be aware that every surgical procedure has a complication. There are special situations, for example, keratoconus progression in VKC, or if we look at the patients of, this is a study on Indian patients who went on to develop keratoconus, and they have noted that patients with younger age of onset, history of eye rubbing and atopic were significantly more at risk of developing eye drops. So we don't want that to happen, and we should go in for an early cross-linking. Also, cross-linking in pregnancy. There have been studies which have shown that especially in the 3rd trimester, there's a major chance that the patient is going to progress. And then it becomes very difficult at that stage to do a cross-linking for so many reasons. So we may consider counseling these patients that they should undergo cross-linking before they become pregnant, because there's a huge chance that they're going to progress. Patient with Down syndrome, we know they have a very high likelihood of having acute eye drops, and in that early treatment it's difficult because they have to be performed under GA, and often prolonged GA, it takes up to 1 hour. So all these things have to be considered when we are taking up these patients. To conclude, corneal cross-linking is an option that in the last decade has demonstrated its efficacy and safety in halting the progression of keratoconus and other corneal ectasias. Its indication has been extended beyond the classic definition that required the evidence of keratoconus progression, especially in the presence of some risk factors for a possible progression, particularly that of a younger age. However, the results can still be somewhat variable today, and there are several protocols, and each of them, they have their own advantages and disadvantages. I think ultimately the ophthalmologist has to decide what he wants to do. And some predictors of cross-linking outcome have been defined in these patients. When we look at pediatric patients, the considerations, the challenges are that many times the child doesn't complain that he has a visual problem. So there's late diagnosis, they progress faster, there's an unsuccessful conservative care in these patients. Accurate tomography is not possible, topography also, and it's difficult to control the eye rubbing behavior, as well as there's a need for frequent follow-ups of these patients. If you look at the prevalence, there's a huge difference in the prevalence in different regions. They say it's much more common in the Asian subcontinent. And one recent study from Saudi Arabia, it has found a prevalence of 1 in 25, huge, but this was in a limited cohort of patients. And another study from Lebanon also showed an incidence of 0.53%. So one thing is certain, there's a male predominance in these patients who present with keratoconus. And one of the earliest ages that has been reported is as early as age 4. So we should always be alert that it might be keratoconus. Just because the patient is 4 or 5 years old doesn't mean that he cannot have keratoconus. We know that keratoconus tends to be more severe and to progress more rapidly in children. So why? Because there are higher rates of corneal collagen remodeling, which were observed in pediatric corneas. We know that our tissues change as we age, and there's a natural cross-linking which occurs as we age. So that is not so in children. There's a dynamic environment. There are weak ectatic lamellae, which may exceed the capacity of cross-linking process, which leads to more rapid ectasia progression. We know that the size of the collagen fibers increase as the patient ages. So at a younger age, it is lesser. There is a frequent coexistence of ocular pathology, such as atopy and vernal keratoconjunctivitis, that has been associated with faster progression and long-term complications in pediatric keratoconus. So of all together, there's a more debilitating progression with an increased likelihood of corneal opacity, subsequent keratoplasty, and hydrops, and so many other things. So if you compare it to the adult keratoconus, there's a more rapid, more aggressive course in children, especially those with central cones. So watch out for children with central cones, be more aggressive. And there's a lower, thinnest corneal thickness. And there's an increased corneal curvature, and there's a higher average central corneal keratometry. There's increased posterior elevation, all these things which lead to a worse outcome in these patients. And there are higher rates of progression. This is a very interesting paper by Chadzis and Habezi. And what they have done is they have studied 59 eyes of 42 children, both preoperatively and after the follow-up. And they found that the eyes which had been treated with, should be treated with cross-linking as soon as the diagnosis is made. So they found a considerable difference in patients who had not undergone cross-linking. Similarly, there's another study of more than 2,700 patients over an 8-year period, and they identified younger age as an independent risk factor leading to keratoplasty in patients of keratoconus. And Sotters et al. Also reported that patients were progressing even up by 2.6 diopters very early in these patients, 2 to 5 diopters over a year. Now, if we look at the Dresden protocol cross-linking, we know that it works in adults, but it's also been shown to work in children. There are several studies to that. I will not go into detail of this. Some of our own experience at PGI Chandigarh, and we found that no doubt about it that there was a difference in the MRSE, which improved not only at 2 years, but at 5 years. This is 66 eyes, 66 pediatric eyes that we had. There was an improvement in the sphere and improvement in the cylinder. And what I want you to see is at 2 years as well as 5 years, because many studies have said that the effect of cross-linking wanes off after 2 years, and gradually by 5 years, then we might see a big reversal. In our study, we are analyzing these results, but I think more than 25% have shown, overall these results look good, but if you see individually, I think more than 25% of these patients have now progressed at 5 years after responding at 2 years. And we can see that there is a change. The mean posterior K and posterior steep K, it's all looking good in these patients. So in our experience, in my personal experience, pediatric keratoplasty cross-linking works. To conclude, the field of pediatric cross-linking is yet to be fully addressed, and the current published literature on cross-linking is not as extensive for pediatric population as it is for adult population. Very few institutions do it. There's a risk of GA, and many of the local ophthalmologists may be reluctant to do it, and which places a lot of load on big institutes. Currently available evidence that the standard cross-linking resident protocol is at least temporarily effective in halting the progression and even improving the keratometry values in pediatric patients. There has been a demonstrated regression up to 3 years after treatment in some studies. Given the concern of regression of keratoconus after cross-linking in children, studies assessing the effect of cross-linking in pediatric patients should provide at least 5 years. So whenever we are analyzing the data, I think it has to be 5 years or more in these patients. Very, very few studies are there, or the patients are too less for us to draw a logical conclusion. Because of the evidence of rapid progression in most pediatric patients and the cost effectiveness of early cross-linking compared with standard traditional management of keratoconus with late keratoplasty, treatment on diagnosis, close monitoring should be considered. Thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Supriya and Dr. Ashish in my treatment of these patients and my presentation. Thank you very much.